All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, Governor Kathy Hochul's controversial move to weaken Kalief's law is sparking outrage across New York. Critics say the backdoor repeal would roll back crucial criminal justice reforms, allowing police to withhold evidence and jeopardize the rights of those awaiting trial. Will New York turn back the clock on justice? And finally, a new proposal aimed at reforming police practices is gaining traction in New York. The NYPD Curb Act seeks to restrict the use of stop-and-frisk tactics, focusing on ending racial profiling and improving police-community relations. Will the Curb Act reshape policing in New York? As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. All right, well, hello. Welcome to Today's Verdict, the interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Well, Today's Verdict always encourages you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet me at David Lesh and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. And check us out at bronxnet.tv. Kalief Browder was a 16-year-old from the Bronx who spent 3 years on Rikers Island without trial, accused of stealing a backpack. His case became a symbol of injustice after he was repeatedly denied bail and the evidence against him was never presented. Tragically, Kalief's experience led to his death by suicide, sparking nationwide calls for criminal justice reform. To talk to us more about this, we have James Inniss from the New York Communities for Change. James, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's a very sad story.
It's a sad story that touched me from day one. So.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about you first, okay? Let the viewers know who you are. Who are you, James?
I'm a born and raised Bronxite. I'm from Allerton and White Plains Road. I've lived here my whole life. And I work in criminal justice reform, right? I've been doing this work now for 4 years. Prior to this, I worked for FedEx. I didn't even know organizing existed. I didn't know I can have a role in this. COVID-19 happened, and I started doing mutual aid in my community, was introduced to organizing, was introduced to advocacy, and years later, my experience being from the Bronx, growing up, I'm 43 years old. I grew up in the 90s, right? I grew up in that stop and frisk era. I grew up experiencing that. So when it came time to figure out where I wanted to put my energy, being a Bronxite, it was criminal justice reform. And
it was your passion.
It's something I knew. It was something that I didn't have to read up on and study. It's something I experienced.
Did you personally ever have any issues with the NYPD while you were in the Bronx?
I joke and say I was 15 years old and I was 6'1", right? Like, yes, the NYPD saw me as an adult when I was a kid. Obviously, we hop out of cars. We call them hop out boys, the detectives. They hop out, make you lift your shirt and do a spin to make sure you don't have a gun, and then they go on their way. And it's a trauma-inducing thing.
It's got to affect you.
It's something that stays with you. It's something that guides, at least me, my decisions going forward, and not wanting the future generations to go through that, because it's a real trauma.
It almost seems like you're on pins and needles all the time. You never know who's going to jump out of a car to bother you or harass you.
And in an environment of extreme poverty, right? You don't know if they're actually the police every single time when people are hopping out.
Sure.
Like, it's extremely trauma-inducing. It's extremely scary.
I've been on I have been on the streets of the Bronx every once in a while. Well, the police run past me. They're trying to grab somebody, but you don't even know who's running after who. It's happened so quickly. It's very scary.
Organized. We know now, like, felony murder. What is that? When the police kill somebody chasing somebody else, and
yeah.
now, actually, these things happen, and it affects everybody in the community when one thing happens, and we need to be aware of all of that.
Let's talk about Kalief.
Of course.
Let's tell the viewers his story, if you could.
He was walking down the street with a friend of his one night here in the Bronx when a NYPD cruiser pulled up and said, "You've been accused of stealing a backpack." Took him to his local precinct. He already had a run-in with the police, so they decided he should go to Rikers instead of be sent home. He was denied bail and sent to Rikers. Now, we say he had multiple trips to court. He had 31 trips in front of a judge, and 31 times he was sent back to Rikers Island, specifically and solely because the evidence or the discovery was not ready for trial.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because sometimes the viewers don't understand what discovery is, right? Discovery is when evidence that you get, you're supposed to get before a trial. Both sides are supposed to get this,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, correct.
Well, why didn't anybody get the evidence with respect to Kalief and his backpack or the investigation? Why?
Well, the specifics of this investigation, he was accused by one person, and that one person left the country and just never came back. The NYPD knew the person left the country. They were attempting to get the person to come back to the country, or so they say. But the only evidence was the accusation of this person. So they waited basically for 3 years to try to get the accuser to come back.
So in the meantime, during the 2 to 3 years, when they can't find the accuser, Kalief is staying in Rikers Island.
31 trips to Bronx
31
Superior
trips
Court,
back and forth, all because of a backpack.
and 2 of the years were in solitary confinement. We have to bring that up. Like, this was when you were allowed to put 16-year-olds in solitary confinement in 2012, right?
Can I ask you a question? Why did they put him in solitary?
There are a lot of psychological. He fought back against everybody. He had a really hard time. He fought back against the other inmates. He fought back against the COs. And there's a psychological thing that he felt he was 100% innocent.
And there was also a mental health crisis going on.
Still going on. There's a mental health still going on. It was overcrowded. New York City's done a great job in the years since then of decreasing the population on Rikers Island. Back in 2012, the population was higher than it is today. So, and it's a hellhole. Rikers Island is going to close by 2027.
Yeah, and you use that word hellhole. We talked off camera. You can use that word.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a hellhole.
that I've been to Rikers.
Yeah, and it's a hellhole for the COs who work there.
Yeah.
It's a hell. It's not just for the inmates. For everybody who works on Rikers Island, it was built on a garbage dump. It literally has to close. It's legally mandated to close by 2027. And the fact that keeping people there to rot, while you know you're not actively trying to get the evidence, you know the evidence isn't going to come. It's inhumane.
And you end up sitting in a jail cell waiting for the district attorney to give the evidence to your attorney, the defense counsel.
Exactly.
And you just keep waiting and waiting. And finally, when you get it at the very end, and now you want to review it and go through it, you're like, I give up.
Trial is here now.
Forget it. The trial's ready. I give up. I'm going to plead to something.
Let me take the plea. They've been offering me the whole time, right? It's not as if, no, the whole 3 years, he was offered multiple pleas. He was offered a plea to being guilty and will send you home right now. And he was like, I don't want it on my record. I didn't do anything. He kept declining the pleas, and they kept sending him back to Rikers Island. And we know how his story ends, but it ends with him taking his own life. He had multiple attempts on his life while on Rikers Island as well.
Did they do anything about that?
They sent him to the med bay and then put him back where he started from. Like it would.
And you would think they would watch him to make sure that he's safe
from himself.
And
from it's a hellhole that there are no checks, and especially 10, 12, 15 years ago. There were no checks, there were no balances. It was a really lawless place where this 16-year-old, 140-pound soaking wet young man was sent in to be with adults. He was a 16-year-old sent into Rikers Island.
So he spends 3 years.
3 years.
In Rikers Island, waiting for a trial about a stolen backpack when they can't find the accused who's not in the country. And so those 3 years, he's mentally deteriorating while he's sitting in Rikers and having suicidal thoughts.
Suicidal attempts, not just thoughts. Yeah, not just thoughts. Yeah.
And ends up passing away.
One of the Kalief's about in jail stories I speak about is on February 17th, he had a court appearance, and the judge sent him back to Rikers because the prosecutor was on vacation. And I remember this because the next day, February 18th, he had an attempt on his life, and February 18th is my birthday. So that's something that's just always gonna stick with me. Like, I was out at a club or something, and he was in the med bay after trying to attempt on his own life, right? Because the prosecutor was on vacation. And
it's heartbreaking.
It's inhumane. It's more than heartbreaking. Like, this is a human being. This is somebody's son and brother and cousin. Like, this is not just somebody to discard because of an accusation. Like,
he's 16.
At 16, it's bad enough when we're warehousing people up in prisons. This person was accused.
So what's come from this? I mean, have we learned anything?
In 2019, New York State legislature passed bail reform, as we know, but they also passed discovery reform, which we call Kalief's Law. And to name it after Kalief Browder, to put a human face to this problem, because it is a problem that Kalief isn't the only person this has happened to. He's just a person that has gotten a lot of notoriety, got national notoriety. There was a documentary on Netflix.
Yeah, probably because he also committed suicide. Well, a lot of people, they may not commit suicide, but they're sitting behind bars for years, and finally says, you know what, I'll just take the plea, get me out of here. And that's not fair if you didn't do it.
New York State has spent over $200 million paying out settlements to these wrongfully convicted people who have been released since then, right? It's not just an inhumane thing, it's an economic issue that New York State is being this poor, New York City specifically is being this poor at doing the justice part of the criminal justice part. Like, we should have access to all of the information, all of the evidence. It's only a New York City problem. District attorneys in the rest of the state aren't asking for this. District attorneys in the rest of the country have direct access to the evidence. What we're dealing with now is the district attorneys of New York City.
So the district attorneys from New York City are getting it from the NYPD. And the NYPD is slow to get the evidence to the attorney that's representing the state.
I'm not going to speak to what the problem is on that side. I just know that right now the 5 district attorneys of New York City have asked the governor to repeal parts of Kalief's law to make it easier for them to try felony cases specifically is what their argument is. But I'll just say the law that's been passed gives them 30 days to give the evidence for a misdemeanor and 6 months for evidence for a felony. So they have 4 months to gather and get the evidence, and they're saying it's not enough. And felony, there's a whole nother issue with the data that they're using. They're using arrest data relative to indictment data. When police arrest you, they give you a charge, but that's not the charge you're actually charged with at indictment. Like, prosecutors go through the evidence and figure out what they can prove in court, and that's what you're actually charged with.
You know, see, I wonder where the breakdown is. I wonder if it's the defense attorney who's not requesting the evidence quick enough, the district attorney who's not getting it quick enough from the police department, or the police department who's not getting it to begin with and giving it over. Where is it all three?
The district attorneys are supposed to turn everything they have to the quickly. Yeah, but so one of the issues what the governor is proposing is basically so the NYPD and the district attorneys can pick and choose what evidence is the important evidence to turn over to the public defenders, and that's one of the reasons why we are so adamantly against this. The public defenders or any defense team should have every single bit.
Look,
of
I see it.
evidence to
I
defend
see it on the
themselves.
defense side, on the civil side, and I see it with defendants like City New York. I want everything, and they're like, no, we'll give you this, we'll redact that, we'll give you that, and then by the time I finally get to see everything, it's 4 years is later, and I have to tell my client, I'm sorry it's taken this long, but you know, I couldn't get the discovery. And now I finally got it. It's 4 years later.
Yeah, and that's what the issue is.
Now, can you imagine if those 4 years they were actually spending behind bars, or 3 years behind bars, and not just, you know, in their homes just waiting to get, you know, monies for an accident or something.
And bigger than being behind bars is your personal trauma. You are now, if you could be the breadwinner, your family is losing a breadwinner. They're losing a mentor. Like, you're taking somebody out of that home. That's a threat to the public safety of the community.
We don't have too much time. You have a fundraiser, right? Or
no,
you have
a rally.
A rally. Where is that going to be?
So outside of the courthouse where Kalief had all 31 of his appearances, we're going to rally together with electeds, other advocates, and specifically I want to shout out the Bronx defenders, but other legal defenders in the city who are all going to come out and ask the legislators to toe the line and put a bow on it. Both houses of the legislature, the upper house and the lower house, the Senate and the Assembly, both declined the governor's request to roll it back. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be rolled back. That doesn't mean Kalief's law is safe. So that's why we're having this rally. We want to make sure the governor and the 5 New York City district attorneys don't roll back the Kalief's law. What they're saying is it's a tweak to the law, but what the lawyers all over are saying is no, it's a complete taking away of the law, and it's going to bring us back to that blindfold era. And that's unacceptable.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, James, but some really important stuff you're telling us.
And it's a lot, and I know we get into the weeds, and I'm not a lawyer. I sit with lawyers all day.
But you're passionate, and that's what we want
here.
Yeah,
and we want people to understand as well.
Well, you'll come back, right? You let us know what's going on?
Whenever you want me, definitely. I appreciate you and everything you do as well.
Absolutely. All right, don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back. All right, well, the Communities United to Reject Brutality, or otherwise known as the Curb Act, is a new legislation which would stop the New York City Police Department from deploying its militarized units, the Strategic Response Group, to protests and other First Amendment protected activities. Advocates say it's a crucial step towards accountability, while critics argue it could limit law enforcement's ability to combat crime. To tell us more about this, we have the New York Civil Liberties Union. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, thanks for having us.
All right, let's introduce yourselves so we know who you are.
My name is Isabelle Leyva. I'm a senior organizer at the New York Civil Liberties Union, and I work on the Curb Act campaign and policing issues across the city.
And I'm Michael Sisitzky. I'm the Assistant Policy Director here at the New York Civil Liberties Union.
All right, well, let's start with the Curb Act itself. Either one, doesn't matter. Please describe for me what the Curb Act is.
Sure. So I can start. The Curb Act is legislation that would put an end to the abuses of the Strategic Response Group, which is a unit that has gained infamy for its deployment at and brutality at protests, by preventing the NYPD from deploying it to protest activity, or just renaming the unit and deploying a future unit that's pretty much the same thing to protest going forward. But more broadly, it also would impose restrictions on the most abusive tactics that we've seen the NYPD deploy at protests. So things like kettling and trapping people in an area where they can't leave to facilitate a mass arrest. The indiscriminate use of pepper spray on protesters as crowd control, shoving bicycles against crowds of people to push them back, which is something we've seen happen a lot. It's getting a handle on those abusive tactics and saying no more.
So is it the tactics that's the issue, or is it just the department that's the issue? In other words, what if we kept the department and we just changed the tactics? Which one is it, or is it both?
Well, the SRG was only created in 2015. It's a very new unit. And the problems with the SRG, which are extremely high levels of misconduct, racial bias, brutality, and the militarization of this unit, are really inherent to what the SRG actually is. And this unit carries no unique function that is not already covered by other units in the NYPD outside of policing protest. So when folks raise the concern about removing the SRG from protests, interfering with the NYPD's ability to handle crime, the two things actually aren't related. And if the concern is the NYPD being able to handle crime, then that's even more of a reason to remove this militarized unit from protest activity.
Does the Michael? Michael, let me ask you a question. The militarized unit itself. Does it portray some type of strength that makes the community a little bit wary? What is it doing mentally to the people who see this group come out at the rallies?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is, the SRG, in their own training materials, they are basically sent in. They were originally billed as a counterterrorism unit. And that there was an initial promise from the police department that they wouldn't deploy them at protests, but they ended up actually using them mainly for that. And they are there really as a show of force from the NYPD. They're trained to use really aggressive tactics against specifically Black Lives Matter protesters, against racial justice protesters. It's kind of baked in that they think that they need this stronger militarized response to groups that they are viewing as kind of deserving of kind of special aggressive tactics. And the problem is when you send in that unit, what they end up doing is, actually escalating the encounter on their own. When they send in that militarized unit, it's not even because they're necessarily responding to any kind of protest or demonstration that is posing any real threat. It's the officers coming in from the SRG with that military equipment, with their hyper-aggressive tactics, with their bias training that is actually making the situation worse. They bring force, they bring violence, and they often are the reason why protests escalate and why we see the kind of chaos that can unfold when NYPD is showing up with this unit.
Isabelle, I'm going to put on my other hat for a second. I'm going to take the other side here. There are many protests where the protesters don't disperse, where the protesters refuse to leave. Colombia, for instance, which has been happening with the pro-Palestinian protesters. What are you supposed to do when they won't stand up and leave the area so that people can get to school and get to their classes? Tell me, what what other recourse do we have but a special unit to possibly use more force? Isabelle?
The strategic response group is not unique in its ability to arrest protesters for being somewhere that they are not supposed to be. The NYPD was perfectly capable of policing protests prior to the SRG's existence. This unit went from a $13 million unit to a $133 million unit with no accountability, no oversight. The reality is that removing the SRG from protests will not have an impact on the NYPD's ability to police protests because protests are policed weekly in New York City where the SRG does not show up simply because the NYPD does not see the subject matter of a protest as an issue. So this really is about sending a militarized unit to exercise undue force on nonviolent protesters. And as someone who's documented police conduct at more than 400 protests since 2020, that is what we see. We do not see the SRG coming in to save the day. We see the SRG coming in and causing injury and causing chaos.
Well, Michael, let me ask you quick. Let's talk about saving the day. Have you ever seen any protests throughout New York that you'd like to see somebody come in and save the day because it doesn't look like this peaceful protest is so peaceful?
I think the issue is we've not seen the SRG actually fulfill the role that the NYPD claims that it is, which is about responding to protests in a way that is supposed to facilitate our expression of our First Amendment values and ability to express our views on political issues. We've seen the SRG, we've seen this unit, we've seen it deployed in ways that are actually directly in contravention of our core First Amendment values and rights. And it's just not been a success story here. This is a unit that has been found to be at the center of some of the worst abuses that we've seen at protests. It was the subject of a Human Rights Watch investigation from the 2020 protests that found that they were a core reason why the protests in Mott Haven escalated the way that they did. And that protesters, journalists, people who were convening nonviolently to protest, to demonstrate, to call out for reform in the wake of George Floyd's murder, the SRG was a core reason why those protesters were subject to abuse, why their First Amendment rights were violated. This is not a unit that has any business policing protest. The NYPD first, they seemed to recognize that at one point in 2015 when they said, actually, don't worry, we won't deploy this at protests. They have gone back on that promise, and we've seen the result of that walk back, which is the abuse of New Yorkers' First Amendment rights.
Isabelle, let's get back to the issue of compromise and whether or not we could keep this group and somehow limit their tactics. If that's even possible, I'm not quite sure. But let's say it is. Which tactics would you limit?
I mean, the tactics that are outlined in the bill are the tactics that are most used by the SRG. So like Michael mentioned, kettling, use of pepper spray, use of sound devices, use of bicycles as weapons. But when we talk about compromise, that really doesn't apply here. Because if we remove the tactics of the SRG, they will be like every other cop at a protest. And that's the whole point, right? The SRG brings a different level of escalation and has this long history of violence. New Yorkers are traumatized by this unit. When we launched this campaign,
let me just stop you for a second. New Yorkers are traumatized by the unit, but New Yorkers are also traumatized by the crime and the fear many of us have throughout the city because of many protests. So how do you respond to those particular individuals that is looking for some strength to feel like they're not afraid to walk down Columbia's campus, let's say?
Well, I think that using Columbia as a very specific example and painting the entire city with that brush as if there are riots in our streets is simply not congruous with reality. And I think what I would say to those people is that fear is real. Everyone wants to feel safe, and the SRG does not keep us safe. Even when the SRG comes in and arrests people that some people might think should be arrested, they do not do it in a safe way. They have often involved pedestrians that are simply just walking by. And this unit is a militarized unit that is not just deployed to protest, but can come to your community if the NYPD sees fit. They do not belong on our streets, regardless of New Yorkers' desire to not want to have to engage with protests in our communities. There are other ways that we can handle that do not require the SRG.
Well, that's really what it comes down to. Michael, the pulse of New York right now, and I don't know if you feel it, but I certainly do, it's just a fear of disorder, and maybe we're swinging too far the other way, right? With these types of groups, is there one particular, solution that you think you could give without moving all the way to the left? Is there something that you think you could put out on air that might be a solution that we could all get behind?
The only word so simple as just one thing, but I think the people's perceptions are grounded in their lived experiences, what they're seeing, and I don't want to discount people's perceptions, but you also do have to look at the actual data on what the realities are, and do policy that is actually based on what reality actually is, which shows us that crime has been on the decline in recent years, and that the vibes are not really matching that. But what you do is not really double down on the tactics that are proven in the past to actually just increase mass incarceration, and not deliver any real solutions. What you actually need to do is the harder work of looking at where we're investing in actually cutting off the root causes of why people are seeing and perceiving disorder. Is it that they have seen someone who is unhoused, who is sleeping on the subway, and it makes them feel uncomfortable? The solution there is not to send police after them. It's to actually figure out how we can get them into permanent, affordable housing, get them the supports that they need. It's the harder work of actually looking at what are the root causes that are driving people's perceptions about disorder, about crime that's leading to that situation, and cutting it off there rather than just a back-end approach of policing, which, sure, it might remove someone from a community for a particular, send them to Rikers and funnel them into a world of horrible injustices there, but it's not actually solving the core problem, and that's what our lawmakers should be focusing on.
All right. Well, listen, I'm always looking for a happy medium, somewhere where the subway riders can feel safe. At the same time, the person who is not doing particularly well on the subway is getting the mental health treatment that they need. So there's never an easy answer to any of these types of things. But I want to thank you both for coming on and discussing the issue, because I think it's important for New Yorkers to know.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's our pleasure. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out on YouTube. Also remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see in a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org or tweet me at davidlesh, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach your verdict. I'm David Lesh, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks with an all-new episode. See you later.